Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is in Bulgaria to meet with the Central and Eastern European countries of the EU to discuss relations and connection to the Belt and Road Initiative. But is Bulgaria of particular importance to China? What does China bring to the Eastern Europeans? And should the EU be worried? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Einar Tangen, an author and columnist, and Ms. Jing Ling, an Associate Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Deng. So, guests, this is the first visit to Bulgaria paid by a Chinese premier in 18 years. What does this tell about the relationship between China and Bulgaria, Ms. Jing?
Actually, this time there for the China CEC summit. We know Bulgaria is traditionally very friendly to China, and we have very good cooperation both politically and economically. So this time the visit will definitely upgrade the cooperation between the two sides. As we know that Bulgaria is located geographically very important, and there are a lot of potential areas, for example, in energy, transportation, and especially agriculture.
Tell us a little bit more about its geopolitical importance here.
You know, if you look at the location of Bulgaria, it's a bridge linking the West and the East. In the history, that have been a very, important geopolitical struggle, actually, between the big powers. But today, it serves as an ideal location to be a bridge to link the West and East. So that is very important for the country to have a very flexible cooperation with all sides.
And Mr. Tang, what do you make of China's connection to that particular part of the world? Ms. Jing just mentioned some traditions, of course. Some countries in that particular part have underwent political system changes, but some friendships remain till right now, right?
Yeah, I think you have to take a step back and take a broader look at the context which you're talking about. This is an interplay between Russia, China, EU, and the United States. And all of these are factoring into what is, in essence, trying to figure out what this group is. Now, remember, this is the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern Soviet Bloc, which is now independent countries. Some are in the EU, some are outside. Some will never join the EU. Others are considering it. So, as a group, it's far from united. It's the dominant player there is Poland, obviously, largest economy and population and land mass. But in the end, what we're talking about here is not ideological, and it's really a shame if people start saying that this is some sort of power play. This is merely about trade. China is pursuing its Belt and Road Initiative as a way of growing it. Now, with the trade tensions that's going on, this just causes China to renew its efforts to create new markets, new areas that it can sell into and who can then buy into Chinese products. So the funny thing about this, the ironic thing, is the U.S., by pushing this trade thing, is actually giving China a greater incentive to do the Belt and Road, because it remains the only positive initiative other than RCEP and some of the other regional economic cooperations, of which this is one, the 16+1.
Ms. Jin, tell us a little bit more about the trade momentum going on right now between China and Central and Eastern European countries. Yes, with the 16+1, we have witnessed a rise of the trade between China and the CEC countries. Last year, I still remember it has increased by more than 15%. But compared with the large market of Western European countries, it is still a small part. So from this perspective, we could see still exists a big potential for the cooperation between China and the CECs. That's very important. I think this time both sides will try to take measures to increase the trade. For example, the agriculture export to Chinese market has been big desire for the countries in this region. This year, we Chinese will hold the import forum in Shanghai, so that will be a big momentum for the cooperations. And it's reported that major cooperation and trade deals will be signed during Premier Li Keqiang's visit this time. You just mentioned agriculture. What could be some other sectors that will be
of common interest here?
I have just been back from Bulgaria. I think both sides have expressed the cooperation in the areas such as nuclear energy and transportation. And importantly, we could find that both sides would like to have innovative cooperations, that they would like to see the small and medium enterprises could have been driving forces for the innovative cooperations. I think that will be a very important potential areas for both sides.
And when we talk about trade, we have to talk about connectivity, and that's also the essence of China proposed Belt and Road Initiative. What do you make of the development in this regard so far between the two sides, Ms. Tang?
Well, it's going forward very nicely. I mean, there was this issue about Russia. I mean, even within this group, there is ambivalence about Russia depending on who you're talking to. I mean, obviously, Poland does not feel the same way as Belarus or some of these other countries. So it's not a uniform group. So how they're reacting to the Belt and Road is really an issue. I think we've entered this period of what I call economic and political realism, where each country is trying to balance these four powers as they go at it. Obviously, China and Russia are coming together. This has led Russia to be less concerned about these kind of initiatives in its backyard. But now, all of a sudden, the EU is sounding the alarm bells and saying that this is some sort of a process to weaken the kind of values and things.
The question
no,
is
it really isn't. I mean, because seeing this, as I said, seeing this as ideological would be really far from the point. I mean, China is not saying, oh, you should be like us, that we have a Chinese exceptionalism, that you should be following, that, we bring you the new future. All they're saying is, we'd like to have trade. We're obviously at loggerheads with the U.S. It's going to be it seems like it's going to be a long-term situation. We need to grow our markets. We see a potential for $2 trillion U.S. dollar worth of trade in this area going two-way, and we want to make sure that it's sustainable. Key to that is this connectivity. If we have roads, rail, airports, and seaports, we can get trade back and forth. Now, all of these countries have lots of small businesses, which you've seen. China is a huge market. It's growing towards a consumer market, and already at 50%. Most major countries are at 70%. This talks about disposable income. These are great opportunities. So the question is, how do you physically do that? Europe is saying, oh, you're just trying to, push these people into these countries into debtor prison. They kept pointing to something where I think it was Montenegro had some sort of highway project, and they said, oh, it increased the national debt. Well, if you don't have any connectivity, you can't make any money. You cannot export your products. And this is true throughout most of the world except the developed world. So this idea that you shouldn't build anything because you'll take on debt, the issue is, will there be return on this investment? And no one really wants to talk about that.
Right. And Ms. Jin, what do you make of this rhetoric hinting that China's closer cooperation with Central and European nations will actually weaken the role of the EU institution?
Actually, when you look back the narratives from EU side about 16+1, at the very beginning it seems there is a little bit suspicious, but not so strong as today. And 2 years later, it seems that with the endeavor of both sides of China and the CEC to comfort the EU, the criticism have been actually decreased to some extent. But these 2 years, we witnessed a rising criticism again. So from this point...
Sorry, rising criticism from where? From within the EU
sides,
or from those particular countries in Central and European region?
Actually, here I major refer to EU institutions and some big powers inside the EU. So when you look at the change, you could see actually from the internal changing dynamic of EU. Recent 2 years, the EU witnessed the Brexit, witnessed the rising tensions between Poland and Hungary with Brussels. So that is a very important internal forces to drive that kind of criticism. Of course, from other perspectives, maybe EU today felt a kind of being weakened or to some extent pressured by Eastern. We see the Russia recent years especially since the Trump administration, pressured by U.S. administration. So EU seems to show strong voices in dealing with some they called big powers that included China. So when we look at all of this, we see some logic behind the EU criticism. But when you look at the reality, EU itself is a multi-level governance structure, so it's very natural for China, US, Russia to deal with on different levels. That's in member states level, regional level, and the EU level. So from this point of view, that is a very natural result of our current cooperation structures. And EU shouldn't never forget that China, from our part, has always advocated for the strong EU and to promote strong support EU integration. So that's narrative, from my perspective, doesn't hold the water. But that really reflects the reality of the lack of trust, political trust between China and the EU.
I want to just add something to that, and I completely agree with your analysis. When it first started out, the EU saw this 16+1 as a bone of contention between China and Russia, basically going into traditional spheres of Russian influence. But now that Russia and China are getting together, now they're alarmed. Now they're saying, oh no, there's something that we shouldn't trust with this arrangement. So I think that's a large part of it. That's why you're seeing this kind of growth. But it also reflects, as you pointed out, there's divisions within Europe itself. We have the East and the West, and they're not seeing eye to eye. And these populist calls against immigration are not just about Muslims. There are a lot of them are aimed at Eastern Europeans, Romanians, et cetera, et cetera. You're seeing the Italians saying we're going to have a head count and we're going to control and and get the fingerprints of all these Romanians and things like that because we don't want them here. So you're seeing a lot of tensions within there. So the interplay of these tensions is that Brussels is making strong statements. I think they feel they have to deal with both of these dual issues: the competition with Russia and also internal factors like immigration.
Right, so we've just discussed a lot about EU's internal affairs, but what about outside pressure? For example, you just mentioned US instigated trade war against nearly all its allies and world's major economies. Do you think this kind of outside pressure will push EU looking for more cooperation with major economies around the world? And that could be good news for the cooperation between China and Central and European countries. Can we build that logic?
Well, it seems like it would be a natural logic to start looking at things. But, I mean, the EU still believes that it has real bones of contention with China over certain issues, intellectual property, etc. So it's not clear. And you can see this in the response that we see today. Merkel has signaled that she wants to make some sort of appeasement with Donald Trump, especially over the auto industry, because, of course, Germany is at the top of that apex and they would have the most to lose. If they give in, but instead of backing off, Donald Trump doubles down, then I think you will see a very clear drift towards China and saying, whatever our problems with China, our problems with the U.S. have become greater. Remember, this is not just about trade. This is about climate change. It's about the situation in Iran, right? About his attacks on NATO and the WTO and every institution that the U.S. and Europe built together after World War II. So this is not striking the right chord. The question is, will he push them over?
Thank you very much. We'll be continuing this after a short break. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. So, guests, as we just mentioned, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, during his visit to Bulgaria, he will attend the 7th meeting of heads of government of China and 16 Central and European countries. It's the 7th meeting this time. What does this tell about mechanism building between China and CEEC cooperation this year?
It's 7 years. It's not so long, but we really went a long journey from the perspective of mechanism building. When we started the summit, it's very, sensitive, actually, from EU perspective, whether you will have institutionalized cooperation. So at that time, both sides didn't have a common secretariat of the cooperation. And with that, we have gradually developed very flexible coordination mechanisms. For example, we have the cooperation mechanism like in the way of association in different areas. In infrastructure, for example, association was laid by Serbia, and also energy by other countries, Bulgaria for agriculture and Czech for finance. So from this point of view, through 7 years of development, we have developed a kind of multi-level cooperation mechanisms, very flexible, very pragmatic.
But bear in mind that the 16 countries in the Central and Eastern European region have different levels of development. How should they coordinate with each other and find a common ground to cooperate with China? Or this is more about one-to-one?
No, I mean, this is a loose confederation that was born out of, as we said, the Soviet bloc. It has nothing to do with the economic realities. This is not the EU by any means, and no one anticipates that it becomes that. It's simply a trading mechanism, a way of getting together 16 countries plus one and talking about issues of mutual benefit. And that's why I'm saying trying to see this as any way ideological is just a huge mistake. There's no one entity on the 16 side. Right, we've already.
That's why Ms. Jing called it flexible mechanism.
Well, it's flexible,
right?
but it's just literally how can we work together for a mutual benefit and a brighter future, and that's all it is. But it's being painted in a lot of corners, in a lot of capitals, in Brussels and in Washington, as somehow a threat to the free world. But you're seeing this kind of rhetoric. The problem with this is you cry wolf too often, and no one will listen.
Right, so talking about specific projects linking to China's Belt and Road Initiative, we know that right now you can make a train trip, a cargo train trip from cities like Chengdu or Chongqing in southwest China directly to Poland. So do you think this kind of connectivity will be enhanced in the near future, Ms. Jing?
Yes, last year we witnessed a double of the trains between China and European cities. When we look at the China-Europe trainings, we should go beyond the freight trains. It actually helps to explore the trade potentials and also increase the local cooperations. This time we had, during our think tank network, we met a scholar from Lodz, Poland, one city of the Poland. He personally expressed the importance of the direct train links, how these links have increased the local cooperations. And, it has helped to explore the big trade potentials between two different cities. And that's, I think, should the significance of the trainings should go beyond only, the freight. That, to my understanding, it's all kind of actual people-to-people link. For example, when the Polish goods or the goods from other European capital cities to reach the table of Chinese public, that actually is a kind of cultural interaction between the two sides. So that's a different state of soft connectivity.
Right. Yes.
But this soft connectivity is a big issue, though, because we do trade with Poland in one of our businesses, and they really don't know that much about China. They come here, but they don't know the language, the legal structure, the cultural aspects, and vice versa. And this is one of the big issues that China faces right now. It really needs to have a educated group of people on both sides who understand all these things. I mean, linguistic difficulties are, we should be able to overcome them, but it's not that easy. And using English as a third trade language doesn't always make it work. So, and this is not just with the Belt and Road Initiative is going to depend on China having the kind of human resources that can kind of help this transition and help trade. And that's one of the issues I think that they're working on. There's a lot more emphasis on learning what the British used to call geography, where you literally, as part of your university study, study. You'd study the area, a country, you'd know the language, the customs, the history, everything, so that you were in a position to go there and actually be of some help. And if this can be achieved, I think the Belt and Road, the initiative could be enhanced.
So it's not only about intergovernmental exchanges, it's also about public diplomacy and people-to-people exchanges, right, Ms. Ji?
Yes, it's very important. That is why people-to-people exchange has been the fifth, priorities listed in
You just mentioned a think tank network cooperation.
Yes, that's a specific way of people-to-people exchange. And also from enterprises level, they have realized the importance of to establish links between the enterprises of both sides. I know from Bulgarian side, and they have tried to have such links to bring the entrepreneurs from different small and medium enterprises together to cultivate the common sense of the enterprises development. So that is a very important link to make the small and medium enterprises to know each other's market. That is a long-term, I think, scenario for the cooperation to be sustainable.
And, yes. And I completely agree with that. Sustainable means mutual benefit. If there's profits being created, then it will be sustainable. But if it's just the governments exchanging people, after a while that can be very difficult to maintain. So yes, the more small trade that you're doing, the more industries and companies that are dealing between China and things individually, I think the better off things will be.
So what do you make of the current trade structure right now between China and Central European region? Is it complementary, or is it still imbalanced that needs to be addressed?
Well, right now it's a little top heavy. You have the major, because we're talking about infrastructure. You can't do trade unless you can get there. So you have this situation where you have to build the infrastructure in order for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the ones that create the jobs, not only in China, but around the world, where they can start seeing the opportunities and maximizing them on both sides. Once you have that, I think it'll be fine. But there are also other issues. I mean, it's very difficult for Chinese companies to start even a representative office and things. And imagine how many different cultures and languages, histories, legal systems, everything that you'd have to learn if you're going through. Now, one of the things that China has done is something called TIR. This is a system that was developed in Europe after World War II to help in the rebuilding of Europe that allows sealed containers shipped from specific trusted shippers to other shipping zones without having to be opened and inspected. And this is, China joined a year and a half ago. They're in the midst of training. But this TIR system actually now covers all of these areas. So now, if I'm a small company, I can just load it into a sealed container, and it goes from A to B, and there's no problems, no delays, nothing gets lost because something got opened, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So these are the things that I think are really, it's the small details, how you actually make trade after you've created the trade routes.
And it's from the big picture, it's a sensitive time of rising protectionism and even populism. So it's very important to address the people's feeling that they're not equally benefiting from a two-way trade or multilateral trade, or a sense of losing out in the game. Do you think when that kind of sentiment arises, how should the two sides deal with it?
You mean the China CEC?
Yes, cooperation.
Or broadly China-EU?
Both.
Both, yes. Yeah, it's very important today when we witnessed the rising anti-globalization. We see that major, the trends of rising protectionism actually related to the internal redistribution systems that create a kind of losers and winners division. So it's very important for, I think, for the big powers or major economies to look at this issue seriously. But I think all of the actors in the world economy, we should understand dealing with this kind of division issue only with the will of taking protectionist measures will come to no end. So that requires all the actors to join hands to promote still free trade. As we know, free trade today, even it's highly disputed in developed economies, but it still promotes the growth and the jobs. So that's very important for the world growth. So we should, instead of taking barriers, raising tariffs, we should join hands to find ways to deal with these internal divisions.
And when you talk about cooperation, overseas cooperation and investment, you have to talk about risk management. In Western-style election politics, when government changes, maybe the whole policy, the whole contracts will change. So how do you address that possibility?
Well, I mean, there are different ways of doing it. You can get political risk. You can literally underwrite through existing companies and just say, look, if this happens, then you have to make me whole, or, I can do that. I think the main issue here, though, is having settled relations and allowing countries to have a certain leeway. I like the RCEP approach. And what this is a trade group that says, listen, we're not going to get down to the individual level of what you do. You can hold back 5% and then gradually that percentage goes down. But it allows countries to make decisions about what is politically sensitive, rather than trying this kind of lockstep approach that the U.S. has always had that says, you have to do this, you have to do that. You can't protect this industry. The political realities of every country is different. And just working towards it in a pragmatic, flexible way is going to be far more attractive than having the U.S. pull out the old hammer and saying, you're going to be exactly the way we're going to make you in our image.
What's your take on this, Ms. Jin?
Yes, dealing with the rising protectionism, Trump's way, definitely not the correct way. And today, China, EU, and U.S. as first three trade powers.
And China is the largest trading country in the world.
But EU is the biggest trading bloc.
Yes.
So these three sides today, I think, should avoid the ways of, I like to say today, EU and the US seems to have a kind of trend that to scapegoat China for the rising protectionism. As I've said, this strongly related to its internal, economic structures and their welfare systems. I give you an example today why EU and the US held a little bit different position toward the open trade system is because there are different roles in the globalization process. EU with its welfare system and with its competitive manufacturing industry make it more comfortable than US in the system. So it's the problems or the rising protectionism inside should be dealt with the resource of their own social system instead of, as I've said, by raising barriers to deal with that. So the only way out is for the open economies to be open and also to sit together to see how to reform the current WTO system.
And that's what China will do as well, further reform open up its market to the outside world. Thank you very much, Ms. Jinling and Mr. Einar Tangen. That's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. Bye for now.